The Xindi ambassador's gasp echoed off the vast crystalline dome of the council chamber as Earth's oceans filled the immense holographic display. Alien jaws dropped. Wide eyes stared in disbelief at the impossible sight of endless blue water under white clouds. A planet covered in oceans was only a myth, a fanciful legend from the early days of space travel before every hospitable world had been stripped of its water by the ever-growing populations of the galaxy. But here was proof. Earth was real, and if this human told the truth, his planet held more water than 100 Xindi worlds combined. Ambassador Alan Young of Earth stood calmly at the center of the chamber, a small smile on his face as he watched the Xindi High Council grapple with the revelation. Just moments before, the alien politicians had looked at him with thinly veiled scorn, seeing only a primitive creature from a backwater world seeking scraps from their galactic empire. The Xindi homeworld was a blazing desert, with not a drop of liquid water to be found on its scorched surface. The same was true across their dominion. Barren, arid planets baked under angry suns. Oceans and rivers were only distant memories. But Earth was different. And now the Xindi knew what Alan and the few other spacefaring humans had kept secret. Their little blue planet, that unremarkable speck on the galactic map, was the key to power in an increasingly thirsty galaxy. The Xindi council leader, a tall reptilian named Linux, finally broke the silence. This is unbelievable, he sputtered. We must adjourn to discuss. Alan nodded solemnly as the council filed out, still buzzing with shock and excitement. The human diplomat sat and interlaced his fingers, his calm exterior not betraying the rapid beating of his heart. He knew what the classified report said. He knew that interstellar wars were already being waged for the last few drops of water. Earth had something no other species could claim. Oceans, an abundance of the most precious liquid in the universe. The negotiations with the Xindi had suddenly turned from a plea for aid to a struggle for the future of the human race. If Alan played this right, he could ally humanity with the greatest power in the galaxy. If he failed, the Xindi might decide it was easier to take Earth's water by force. The fate of the human race hung in the balance. Alan could only hope he was up to the task as sweat beaded on his forehead. The Xindi Council would return soon, and the real fight for Earth's future would begin. After 30 tense minutes that felt like hours, the chamber doors slid open with a hiss. Linux strode in at the head of the Xindi delegation, his scaly face unreadable. Alan stood, trying to gauge the councilors' expressions as they filed in and took their seats. The human's heart pounded in his chest. Everything hinged on what Linux would say next. The Xindi leader cleared his throat, glancing around the room before fixing his gaze on Alan. Ambassador Young, we have discussed your proposal at length. The High Council has voted unanimously to approve a preliminary alliance and trade agreement with Earth, effective immediately. Relief washed over Alan like a tidal wave. He exhaled slowly, not realizing he had been holding his breath. Linux continued, securing a reliable water trading partner is of critical strategic importance to the Xindi Empire. Your planet's resources will be invaluable to our civilization. Linux stepped forward and extended a clawed hand to Alan. The human clasped it firmly, sealing the deal with a handshake. Earth is proud to call the Xindi our allies and friends. This is a historic moment for both our peoples. That evening, Linux hosted a lavish state dinner in Alan's honor to celebrate the monumental agreement. The grand banquet hall was adorned with shimmering holographic projections of Earth's oceans and Xindi symbols of friendship and unity. As Alan mingled with the Xindi dignitaries, sampling exotic delicacies and sipping jewel-toned drinks, Linux approached with the tall reptilian female in tow. Ambassador Young, I'd like you to meet Captain Zalara, one of our most decorated explorers. Alan shook Zalara's hand, noting her strong grip and piercing gaze. It's a pleasure, Captain. I've heard tales of your many voyages and discoveries. Zalara flashed a toothy grin. The pleasure is mine, Ambassador. Actually, our paths have crossed before, in a sense. Many years ago, I led a survey mission to your world. We intercepted primitive Earth broadcasts and traced them back to their source, curious to learn about your people and planet. Alan's eyebrows shot up. You visited Earth? When was this? Oh, it must have been about 80 years ago, give or take, Zolara said casually, as if discussing a trip to the market. My ship remained cloaked in high orbit for several days as we monitored your transmissions and scanned the surface. I still remember the images our sensors captured. Vast blue oceans spanning nearly 3/4 of the planet, swirling white clouds, dynamic weather patterns. It was unlike anything we had ever seen. The sheer volume of liquid water was staggering. The explorer pulled out a small handheld device and tapped the screen. A hologram bloomed to life above it, displaying a slowly rotating Earth. Cerulean seas dominated the globe, broken by green and brown landmasses. Alan smiled at the achingly familiar sight of home. Zolara continued. We briefly considered initiating contact, but your civilization's technology was still quite primitive then, so the High Council decided against it. The records of our survey were immediately classified at the highest level. The Xindi did not want to risk other spacefaring races discovering Earth's water riches and attempting to seize them by force. Linux nodded solemnly. Yes, over the decades, the legend of the ocean planet faded into obscurity, dismissed as exaggeration and hearsay by most Xindi. Only a select few knew the truth. Until now, of course. As the dinner wound down, Linux pulled Alan aside. He pressed a small glass vial into the human's palm. It contained a pale blue liquid that seemed to shimmer under the banquet hall's lights. A token of our newly forged friendship, Linux explained. Xindi water wine, an extremely rare delicacy reserved only for the most momentous occasions. Linux described how water was so precious that brewing and distilling it into a sippable spirit was an extravagant luxury, almost unheard of. Alan wrapped his fingers around the cool vial, profoundly moved by the significance of the gesture. Retiring to his quarters after the dinner, Alan flopped onto the bed, physically and emotionally drained by the day's events. As he turned the water wine vial over in his hands, he contemplated the seismic shift that had just occurred. Earth's abundant water, a resource humans often took for granted, had catapulted his species from a little-known newcomer to a major strategic partner of the galaxy's mightiest empire. Alan's mind raced as he considered the ramifications and ripple effects the alliance would have. How would the other spacefaring civilizations react to the news? The precious liquid that filled Earth's oceans had rewritten humanity's role and relationships on the galactic stage in ways he never could have imagined. One thing was clear to the weary ambassador as he drifted off to sleep. Earth would never be the same. The Human-Xindi alliance had just sent a shockwave across the cosmos that was only beginning to be felt. Alan's head spun as he processed the sudden turn of events. Just a week ago, he'd been toasting the historic alliance between Earth and the Xindi. Now, he stood in the council chamber as alarms blared, watching Xindi officials scramble to prepare for an impending attack. Linux's voice cut through the chaos. Ambassador Young, we need Earth's decision now. Will you stand with us? Alan nodded, his throat dry. I'll contact Earth immediately, but you have my word. We won't abandon you. He rushed to the communication hub, punching in the secure channel to Earth's Interstellar Affairs office. The longest 30 seconds of Alan's life ticked by before the holographic display flickered to life, revealing the stern face of Director Chen. Director, we have an emergency, Alan said, his words tumbling out in a rush. The Krellians are demanding exclusive rights to Earth's water. They've got a battle fleet ready to attack the Xindi homeworld if we don't comply. We need to send every ship we've got. Chen's eyes widened. Slow down, Ambassador. Are you saying Earth is about to be dragged into an interstellar war? If we don't act fast, yes. The Krellians have given us 1 hour before they open fire. Director, we can't let the Xindi face this alone. Our alliance is barely a week old, Chen interrupted. You're asking us to commit to a war we're not prepared for. Alan leaned closer to the display. With all due respect, Director, We don't have a choice. If the Krellians take the Xindi homeworld, Earth is next. We need to make a stand now. Chen's teeth gritted as he weighed the options. After what felt like an eternity, he nodded. Very well. I'll inform the president and mobilize our fleet. But Ambassador, you better pray this gambit pays off. The fate of Earth may well rest on this decision. The transmission cut off, leaving Alan staring at his own reflection in the blank screen. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come, then hurried back to the council chamber. Linux looked up as Alan entered. Well? Earth stands with the Xindi, Alan declared. Our ships are on their way. A ripple of relief passed through the chamber, but it was short-lived. An aide rushed in, panic etched on his face. Counselor, the Krellian flagship is hailing us again. The main display crackled to life, revealing the imposing figure of the Krellian admiral. His metal-plated skin gleamed under harsh lights, and his cybernetic eye whirred as it focused on the council. Your time grows short, Xindi, the admiral growled. Submit to our demands, or face annihilation. Linux stepped forward, his voice steady despite the fear Alan could see in his eyes. The Xindi reject your ultimatum, Admiral. We will not be bullied into surrendering our allies' resources. The Admiral's organic eye narrowed. Then you have sealed your fate. Prepare to... His words were cut off as new alarms blared. The aide's voice rang out. Multiple hyperspace signatures detected. It's the Earth fleet. Alan's heart leapt as the display shifted, showing dozens of sleek Earth vessels dropping out of hyperspace, taking up defensive positions around the Xindi homeworld. He'd never been so glad to see the blue and white colors of the Earth Space Force. The Krellian admiral's face contorted with rage. You dare to defy us? So be it. All ships, open fire. The chamber erupted into chaos as the first salvos were exchanged. Alan watched in horror as energy beams lanced across space, striking both Krellian and Allied ships. The battle for the Xindi homeworld, and perhaps the fate of Earth itself, had begun. Linux gripped Alan's shoulder, his voice grim. I hope your people are ready for this, Ambassador. The real test of our alliance starts now. Alan nodded, his eyes fixed on the battle unfolding before them. In just a week, he'd gone from making history to potentially shaping the future of the galaxy. As explosions bloomed in the silent void of space, he could only hope they'd made the right choice. Alan's wrist communicator buzzed with an incoming transmission. He stepped away from the chaos of the council chamber, heart pounding as he recognized the encrypted signal from Earth. The message scrolled across the tiny screen. Ambassador Young, full authority granted. Commit all assets to Xindi defense. Godspeed. Alan's throat tightened. This was it. He strode back to Linux, speaking in a low, urgent tone. Earth has authorized full military support. Where do you need me? Linux's scales rippled with what Alan had come to recognize as relief. The High Command Center, follow me. They hurried through winding corridors until they reached a heavily fortified bunker deep beneath the Xindi capital. Inside, dozens of officers scurried between holographic displays and communication terminals. At the center stood a towering Xindi with cybernetic implants glinting along his spine. Ambassador Young, meet Admiral Zilath, Linux said. Zilath's cybernetic eye whirred as it focused on Alan. Welcome to hell, human. Let's hope your people are ready for a real fight. The Admiral waved a clawed hand, and a massive hologram of the Xindi system sprang to life. Red icons swarmed at the edges. Krellian bastards are massing in the asteroid belt, Zilath growled. Beyond our defense grid's range. Their vanguards already hit us hard. Shipyards at Moons 3 and 7 are gone. Outpost Zeta is dark. Alan studied the hologram, noting the blue icons of Allied forces. That's the Dauntless, he said, pointing to a large marker near the Xindi homeworld. Our third fleet's flagship. They'll hold the line. Zilath snorted. They better. We're outnumbered 3-1, and that's a conservative estimate. Suddenly, alarms blared. A Xindi officer shouted, Massive spatial distortion detected. System edge, Sector 9. The hologram zoomed out, revealing a swirling vortex of energy. More red icons poured through by the second. Sons of whores, Silath snarled. They've thrown everything they have at us. That's their whole sector fleet. Alan's blood ran cold. How many ships? Zilath's organic eye met Alan's. Enough to glass a dozen worlds. Linux stepped forward. Raise the planetary shields now. Zilath barked orders into his comm unit. Outside, a shimmering energy field enveloped the Zindi homeworld. On screens around the bunker, Alan watched civilians flood into underground shelters. Defense platforms pivoted, their massive cannons tracking the incoming armada. Proximity alarms shrieked. Alan, Linux, and Zilath turned as one to face the main view screen. A wave of missiles streaked across the star-filled backdrop, leaving fiery contrails in their wake. Here they come, Zilath rumbled. The missiles slammed into the planetary shield. Blinding flashes lit up the view screen. The bunker shuddered. The battle for Earth's water, for the very future of both their species, had begun. Alan watched as the Zindi planetary shield absorbed the initial Krellian barrage, its energy dispersing in rippling waves across the defensive barrier. "Return fire!" Zilath roared, his cybernetic eye whirring as he processed tactical data. Alan nodded to Linux. "The Dauntless is ready. Let's show them what we've got." On the main view screen, Alan saw the massive human dreadnought unleash a spread of proton torpedoes. The blue-white projectiles streaked across space, slamming into the lead Krellian ships. Explosions blossomed silently in the void, tearing through metal and circuitry. Shindi ion cannons joined the fray, their purple beams lancing out to intercept waves of incoming Krellian fighters. The smaller craft scattered, many erupting into short-lived fireballs as the ion beams found their marks. But for every Krellian ship destroyed, 3 more seemed to take its place. The sheer number of enemy vessels filled the view screen, an endless sea of hostile red markers. "They're pressing the attack," a Zindi officer shouted. "Multiple impacts on orbital defense grid." Alan watched in horror as Krellian railguns and plasma cannons systematically pummeled the Zindi defensive platforms. One by one, the orbital batteries winked out on the tactical display. "Sir!" another officer called out. "Krellian troop transports detected. They're making a run for the capital." Alan's mind raced. "Linux, we need to stop those transports. If they land troops, we'll be fighting a ground war too." Linux nodded grimly. "Agreed. What do you suggest?" "The Dauntless. It's our most powerful ship. If we concentrate its firepower on those transports, we might have a chance." Zilath growled his approval. "Do it." Alan relayed the orders, and on the console, they watched as the Dauntless and its escort ships pivoted to engage the incoming troop transports. The space around the capital lit up with weapons fire as human ships unleashed everything they had. Krellian transports exploded left and right, but not without cost. Alan winced as he saw several human cruisers take critical hits, their hulls breaching in silent bursts of escaping atmosphere. On the ground, Zindi troops scrambled to fortify key positions. Alan caught glimpses of soldiers digging trenches and setting up energy barriers on street corners. In the distance, a contingent of Zindi lancers, their ceremonial armor gleaming, marched towards the government district. "The orbital batteries are gone," Lennox reported, his voice tight. "The Krellians are moving in." Alan watched as the main Krellian fleet advanced, methodically destroying what remained of the Zindi's orbital defenses. Each impact sent tremors through the bunker. "We need help," Lennox said, turning to a communications officer. "Send out a distress call to all our allies, now!" The Dauntless and its remaining escorts maneuvered aggressively, covering the retreat of damaged Zindi vessels. But the Krellians had found their primary target. Concentrated fire from dozens of enemy ships hammered the human dreadnought. Alan's heart sank as he saw the Dauntless shields flicker and fail. A Krellian warhead struck home, tearing through the aft section. Secondary explosions rippled along the massive ship's hull. "The Dauntless is hit!" Alan shouted. "They've lost engines!" They watched in stunned silence as the pride of the human fleet began to drift, pulled inexorably towards the Zindi homeworld by the planet's gravity. Zilath raised a clawed hand, ready to give the order to evacuate the cities when a new alarm sounded. "Multiple hyperspace signatures detected," an officer called out. It's the Tyrillians." A cheer went up as a battle group of sleek Tyrillian cruisers dropped out of hyperspace, immediately opening fire on the Krellian flanks. The unexpected reinforcements bought precious time, allowing civilian ships to begin evacuating from the capital's spaceports. Alan's wrist communicator crackled to life. It was Captain Reeves of the Dauntless. "Ambassador," Reeves's voice was strained but determined. "We're not out of this fight yet. I've got a plan, but it's a long shot." "I'm listening, Captain," Alan replied. "We're going to turn the Dauntless into the biggest bomb this galaxy's ever seen. I need your authorization." Alan's mouth went dry as he realized what Reeves was proposing. He looked to Linux and Zelath, who nodded grimly. "Do it," Alan said. He watched on the tactical display as the Dauntless's remaining fighter squadron swarmed around the crippled ship. Crews worked frantically, loading every warhead they could into the forward bays and rigging makeshift detonators from the ship's own drive core. More Allied ships arrived, joining the desperate battle. Alan saw his chance. "All remaining human and Allied vessels," he broadcast, "form up. We're going to punch a hole through their lines." The Dauntless engines flared one last time, adjusting its course directly towards the heart of the Krellian fleet. The enemy responded immediately, pouring fire into the drifting hulk. "Now!" Alan shouted. "While they're distracted, push through their lines!" As the Allied fleet surged forward, Alan silently saluted the Dauntless and her crew. Their sacrifice might just save them all. The crippled Dauntless hurtled towards the heart of the Krellian fleet, its hull breached and venting atmosphere. Alan watched the tactical display, his fingers digging into the edges of the console as the massive human warship closed the distance. "Now!" Linux barked, his scales rippling with tension. Alan nodded, keying his comm. "All Allied vessels execute Operation Spearhead." The response was immediate. Xindi Lancers, their sleek hulls gleaming, surged forward. Heavy cruisers fell in behind them, forming a wedge. Earth fighters swarmed around the formation, their engines blazing as they strafed Krellian ships attempting to plug the gap. The command center rocked as enemy fire found its mark. Sparks showered from damaged consoles. Alan stumbled, catching himself on a nearby chair. "Shields at 30%, a Xindi officer shouted. Silath's cybernetic eye whirred as he processed the incoming data. "Push through! We won't get another chance!" On the main view screen, Alan watched as Allied ships plowed into the Krellian formation. Energy beams lanced back and forth, punching holes in hull plating. Missiles streaked across the void, leaving fiery contrails in their wake. A Tyrillian cruiser to their starboard flank took a direct hit, its port nacelle shearing off in a spectacular explosion. The ship listed, trailing debris, but stubbornly maintained formation. 5 seconds to Dauntless detonation, Linux called out. Alan gripped the console tighter. "All ships brace for impact." The Dauntless vanished in a blinding flash of light. For a split second, Alan saw the shockwave ripple outward, tearing through Krellian vessels caught in its path. Then the command center's view screen went dark, overloaded by the intensity of the blast. Alarms blared as the shockwave hit. The floor bucked beneath Alan's feet, nearly throwing him to the ground. He heard the screech of twisting metal and the sharp crack of fracturing bulkheads. "Report!" Xylath roared over the cacophony. A junior officer's voice cut through the chaos. "Sir, sensors detecting massive energy spike. It's beyond anything we've ever recorded." Xylath's organic eye widened. "By the first egg. A singularity. All ships, emergency warp. Now." Alan felt the familiar lurch as their ship jumped to faster than light speed. The view screen flickered back to life, showing a swirling maelstrom of energy where the Dauntless had been. Ships caught in its pull stretched grotesquely before vanishing into the void. "Hull integrity failing," an officer shouted. "We can't maintain this speed." Alan watched as the readouts on nearby consoles flickered and died. The deck plates groaned ominously beneath his feet. Just a few more seconds, Linux muttered, his eyes fixed on the sensors. The ship shuddered violently. Alan heard the distinct pop of rivets giving way somewhere deep in the hull. He closed his eyes, bracing for the end. Suddenly the shaking stopped. The constant whine of overstressed engines faded to a dull hum. "We've cleared the event horizon," Zelath announced, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "Stand down to yellow alert." Alan sagged against the console, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Around him, the command center erupted in a flurry of activity as damage reports flooded in. Linux approached, his scales dulled with fatigue. "We made it, Ambassador, but the cost—" Alan nodded grimly, surveying the flickering hollow screens. Where once there had been hundreds of Allied ships, now only a fraction remained. The Krellian fleet had been decimated, but so had their own forces. "Set course for the nearest friendly outpost," Zelath ordered. "We need to regroup and assess our losses." As the battered remnants of the Allied fleet limped away from the battlefield, Alan felt the weight of what they'd just survived settling onto his shoulders. They'd won the day, but at a terrible price. And he knew, with grim certainty, that this was only the beginning. The battered remnants of the Allied fleet limped through space, their hulls scarred and engines straining. Alan Young stood on the bridge of the flagship, his eyes fixed on the looming silhouette of the outer Caritas shipyards. The massive space station grew larger in the view screen, its docking arms stretching out like a lifeline. "All ships, commence docking procedures," Alan ordered, his voice hoarse from hours of issuing commands. As the fleet maneuvered into position, Alan felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Linux, the Xindi's scales dulled with fatigue. "We need to talk," Linux said quietly. "Zelath is waiting in the war room." Alan nodded, following Linux through the corridors of the ship. They passed crew members patching hull breaches and medics tending to the wounded. The smell of ozone and burned circuitry hung in the air. The war room was a flurry of activity when they entered. Holographic displays flickered with tactical data, and officers hunched over consoles, analyzing incoming reports. Admiral Xyleth stood at the center of it all, his cybernetic eye whirring as he processed information. "What's our status?" Alan asked, stepping up to the main tactical display. Zelath's organic eye narrowed. "Not good. Scout reports indicate the Krellians are already regrouping in the Xindi system. They've lost ships, but they're far from beaten." A junior officer approached, handing Zelath a data pad. The Admiral's expression darkened as he read. "Intelligence estimates the Krellians still have over 60% of their invasion force intact," Zelath growled. "More than enough to crush us if we attempt a direct assault." Alan studied the display, watching as red icons representing Krellian ships spread out from the Xindi system. "They're searching for us," he said. "We can't risk leading them back here in force." "Agreed," Linux said. "We need to split up, make ourselves a harder target to track." Alan nodded. "I propose we scatter our remaining ships to hidden nadir points. We can regroup once we've had time to repair and rearm." Zelath considered for a moment, then nodded. "It's risky, but we have no choice. I'll give the order." As Zelath relayed commands to his captains, Alan turned his attention to the shipyards. "We need to get every combat-capable ship operational," he said, "even if it's held together with spit and prayers." For the next week, the Caritas yards became a hive of frantic activity. Alan worked alongside the crews, coordinating repair efforts and strategizing with commanders to redeploy their limited assets. He stood in a half-repaired hangar bay, surrounded by the din of welding torches and shouted orders. "We need those Xindi cruisers covering the Talgath system," Alan said, pointing to a holographic star chart. "It's a vital choke point. If the Krellians push through there, they'll have a clear shot at the core worlds." A human captain nodded, making notes on a data pad. "We'll have them underway within the hour, sir." Linux approached, his scales gleaming with fresh rejuvenation treatments. "I've dispatched couriers to our allies," he reported. "Several battle groups are already en route to reinforce us." Alan nodded, but his expression remained grim. He pulled up a tactical analysis, studying the projected force dispositions. Even with the promised reinforcements, they were still badly outnumbered. A week into their frantic preparations, alarms blared throughout the station. Alan raced to the command center, his heart pounding. He found Zilath already there, barking orders to his staff. "What is it?" Alan asked, breathless. Zilath pointed to a long-range sensor display. "Gravitational anomalies at the system's edge. It's them. The Krellians found us." Alan watched in horror as the scope of the Krellian armada became clear. Hundreds of ships dropped out of hyperspace, their weapons already charging. "They're moving to encircle us," Linux said, his voice tight with tension. Alan's mind raced. "We need to form a defensive perimeter. Buy time for the evacuation." But even as the words left his mouth, the first Krellian salvos struck home. The station shuddered under the impact of armor-piercing rounds. Warning klaxons screamed as hull breaches were reported across multiple decks. "They're launching boarding parties," an officer shouted. Alan grabbed a nearby comm unit. "All hands, prepare for close-quarters combat. Security teams to breach points." The next hours passed in a blur of chaos and violence. Alan coordinated counterattacks from the command center, dispatching strike teams to hold vital choke points. He watched on security feeds as Krellian Marines poured through breach points, engaging in vicious firefights with Allied defenders. "We need to get our people out of here," Alan said, turning to Linux. "Can your Lancers clear an escape corridor?" Linux nodded grimly. "They'll get it done." As Linux relayed orders to his elite troops, Alan focused on coordinating the evacuation. He vectored what few mobile strike groups they had left to clear paths for the escape shuttles. Suddenly, a frantic transmission cut through the din of battle. "Sir, the Krellians have seized the water reservoirs. They're rigging them with dispersal charges." Alan's blood ran cold. He locked eyes with Zilath and Linux, seeing his own despair mirrored in their faces. "We can't let them destroy it," Linux said, his voice barely above a whisper. Zilath shook his head. "We have no choice. Fighting to the reservoirs now is suicide. We must save who we can and escape while we still have ships left." Alan nodded, his throat tight. "Give the order. Full evacuation. We'll regroup at the fallback point and plan our next move from there." Even as he spoke, Krellian shock troops burst through the command center doors. Allied security forces engaged them in a desperate firefight, buying time for the senior staff to reach the last transport. As their ship pulled away from the dying station, a final transmission crackled over the comms. Alan watched in stunned silence as sensors registered a massive vapor plume expanding from the Caritas yards. The last of their precious water reserves dissipated into the void, lost forever. The acrid stench of burned circuitry and scorched metal clung to Alan's nostrils as he stepped off the transport onto Tyrannus Station. Exhausted crew members shuffled past, their faces etched with grief and fatigue. Alan's boots clanged against the deck plates as he made his way to the command center, the weight of their recent losses pressing down on his shoulders. Admiral Zilath and Linux were already hunched over a holographic display when Alan entered. The flickering blue light cast harsh shadows across their faces, emphasizing the strain of the past weeks. "What's our status?" Alan asked, his voice hoarse from hours of issuing orders during their frantic escape. Zilath's cybernetic eye whirred as he processed the latest data. "Not good. Scout reports confirm the Krellians are amassing near the Zindi system. They're preparing for a final push." Linux tapped a control, expanding the display to show the approach vectors to Earth. Red icons representing Krellian scout ships blinked ominously along the outer defensive perimeters. "They're probing our defenses," Linux said, his scales dulled with fatigue, "testing for weaknesses." A junior officer approached, handing Alan a datapad. He scanned the intelligence projections, his gut twisting as the full scope of their predicament became clear. "We don't have the ships or the supplies to withstand a concentrated assault," Alan said, tossing the pad onto the table. "Not after losing Caritas." The room fell silent, the gravity of their situation settling over them like a shroud. Alan's mind raced, searching for options. Suddenly, A half-remembered briefing from his early days as an ambassador sparked an idea. "The Chiron sphere," he said, breaking the silence. "We need to reach out to them." Zelath's organic eye narrowed. "The recluses? They haven't responded to diplomatic overtures in centuries." "Exactly," Alan replied, a hint of desperate energy creeping into his voice. "Which means the Krellians won't expect us to try. If we can secure their aid, their technology could turn the tide of this war." Linux leaned forward, intrigued. "It's a long shot, but we're running out of options. How do you propose we make contact?" Alan turned to his aide, Major Tian Ashara, who had been silently observing from the corner. "Tian, I need you to plot us a course through their border defenses. We'll need a small team, our best infiltrators." Tian nodded, her eyes already distant as she calculated possible approach vectors. "I'll provide a squad of my top commandos," Linux said, led by Captain Raquel himself. Alan felt a glimmer of hope, but Zileth's gruff voice cut through his optimism. "Even if we reach them, the price for their aid may be steep," the Admiral warned. "Are we prepared to pay it?" Alan met Zelath's gaze, his fists tight. "We don't have a choice. Earth will fall without outside intervention." The next hours passed in a blur of frantic preparation. Alan found himself in the bowels of Torinus Station, surrounded by the controlled chaos of the armory decks. Tian and Raquel moved with practiced efficiency, directing the loading of specialized equipment onto their stealth craft. "Is that the slipstream drive?" Alan asked, eyeing a bulky module being carefully maneuvered into the hold. Raquel nodded, his reptilian features set in dogged drive. "It should get us past their subspace interference. After that, we're on our own." A young courier pushed through the bustling crowd, thrusting a data chip into Alan's hand. "Urgent communique, sir." Alan slotted the chip into a nearby console, his blood running cold as he read the report. Human colonies were falling, one after another, to the Krellian onslaught. He looked up, meeting Tien's questioning gaze. "We're out of time. How soon can you launch?" Tien glanced at Raquel, who gave a curt nod. "We can be ready in 30 minutes, sir." Alan clasped Tien's shoulder, his voice low and urgent. "The fate of humanity rests on this mission, Major. Find a way through to the sphere, whatever it takes." Tien saluted sharply, then turned to bark final orders to her team. As Alan watched the infiltrators make their final preparations, he couldn't shake the feeling that this bold strategy might be their last hope. The alarms blared across Tyrannus Station's command decks, a cacophony of urgent tones that set everyone's nerves on edge. Tiana Shara gripped the control yoke of her stealth insertion craft, her fist clenched with tension. Through the view screen, she watched as Rakal's ship took point, leading their small wolfpack formation into the unknown. "All systems nominal," reported her co-pilot Lieutenant Vex. "Slipstream drive primed and ready." Tien nodded, her throat dry. "Engage on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark." The experimental drives roared to life, enveloping their ships in a shimmering cocoon of energy. The stars outside blurred and stretched as they punched through the fabric of space-time. Tian felt her stomach lurch as they accelerated to impossible speeds, boring through the layers of distortion shielding that protected the Chiron sphere. Suddenly, proximity alarms shrieked. "Krellian pickets!" Vex shouted. "They've detected us!" The space around them lit up with weapons fire, lances of energy slicing through the void. Tien's hands flew across the controls, executing evasive maneuvers. "Stealth fields holding," she reported through gritted teeth, but just barely. They pushed deeper into forbidden space, their ships buffeted by strange currents of energy. Tian's eyes darted between her instruments and the archaic star charts they'd cobbled together from fragmented data. "We're entering the xenosingular periphery," she announced. "Brace for turbulence." The ship bucked and shuddered as they plunged into a maelstrom of subatomic particles. Warnings flashed across Tien's console as systems strained against the onslaught. Just as she thought they might tear apart, they burst through the final barrier. For a moment there was an eerie calm. Then chaos erupted once more. Unknown energy signature, Vex yelled. It's... His words were cut off as a barrage of quantum shock pulses slammed into their craft. Sparks flew from overloading consoles, and Tien struggled to maintain control as their drives sputtered and died. "Raquel!" she shouted into the comm. "We're hit. What's your status?" Static crackled. Then the Lancer captain's voice came through, strained but alive. "Drives offline. We're dead in the water." Tien's blood ran cold as she saw it materialize before them, a vast geometric construct of metal and energy, pulsing with alien intelligence. Tendrils of force reached out, ensnaring their ships in an inescapable grip. "This is Major Tian Ashara of the Allied Forces," she broadcast, cycling through every first contact protocol they had. "We come in peace, seeking aid against a common threat." But the entity gave no sign of comprehension. The force matrix tightened, threatening to crush their ships like insects. "Raquel!" Tien shouted. "We need options." "I have one," the Lancer replied, his voice grim. "But it's risky. Prepare to divert all power to your shields on my mark." Tien's fingers hovered over the controls, trusting in her comrade's judgment. She watched as Raquel's ship glowed with building energy, pushing its systems far beyond safe limits. "Now!" Raquel roared. A blinding pulse of gravimetric energy erupted from his craft, slamming into the heart of the cybernexus entity. For a split second, its cohesion wavered. "Go!" Tien yelled, ramming her throttle forward. Their ships slipped free, drives sputtering back to life as they fled deeper into Chiron space. They emerged from slipstream into a realm that defied comprehension. Before them sprawled a structure of impossible scale and complexity, the Chiron domain matrix. Tien gaped at the sight, her mind struggling to process what her eyes beheld. Before she could even begin to chart a course, a wave of scintillating energy engulfed them. Tien felt a moment of vertigo as space itself seemed to twist and fold. Their ships were pulled inexorably inward, drawn along a massive conduit that pulsed with otherworldly power. With a final lurch, they emerged into a vast chamber that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. At its center floated a being of pure energy, its form constantly shifting and flowing. Tien looked to Raquel, seeing her own mix of awe and terror reflected in the Lancer's eyes. She reached for the comm switch, knowing that humanity's fate might hinge on the words she chose next. Tien's fingers flew across the control panel, initiating the heuristic mind-link protocol. Her body tensed as the neural interface engaged, flooding her consciousness with an overwhelming torrent of data. The Chiron Overmind's presence crashed over her like a tidal wave, alien concepts and impossibly vast paradigms threatening to drown her human perception. Raquel stood rigid beside her, his reptilian features contorted in concentration. The Xindi commandos behind them swayed on their feet, eyes unfocused as they grappled with the cosmic influx. One of them stumbled, catching himself on a nearby console. "Hold steady," Raquel hissed through clenched teeth. "Don't let it overwhelm you." Tien barely heard him. Her mind reeled as visions of galactic devastation unfolded before her. She watched helplessly as world after world fell to the Krellian onslaught, entire civilizations reduced to ash and cinders. The images came faster, more chaotic. Planets stripped of resources, stars destabilized, the very fabric of reality warping under the strain. A cold dread settled in her stomach as the flow of information coalesced around Earth. She saw her homeworld as the Krellians saw it, a glistening blue jewel ripe for the taking. The planet's oceans shimmered with potential, each drop a treasure beyond measure to the resource-starved invaders. "No," Tien whispered, her voice barely audible. "They can't." Her protest was cut short as a new wave of data crashed over her. The Chiron's consciousness expanded, presenting a dizzying array of possible futures. Tien's mind strained to comprehend the branching timelines, each decision point spawning countless new realities. She glimpsed a future where the Chiron unleashed its full might against the Krellians. The resulting conflict tore holes in the universe itself, leaving vast swathes of dead space in its wake. In another potential timeline, She watched in horror as the Krellians harnessed energies beyond mortal comprehension, their victory assured but at the cost of reality itself. Just as Tian thought her sanity would crack under the onslaught, a singular path crystallized before her. The Chiron's offer hung in the air, unspoken yet unmistakable, a chance at salvation, but at an unthinkable price. She turned to Rakal, seeing her own conflict mirrored in his alien eyes. The weight of galaxies pressed down upon them, demanding an answer. "We can't," Tian breathed, her voice raw with emotion. "Earth is everything we've fought for. To sacrifice it now—" Rakal's scaled hand gripped her shoulder, steadying her. "And if we refuse, we doom not just Earth, but countless worlds to Krellian rule." Tian's mind raced, seeking alternatives, loopholes, any way out of this impossible choice. But the Chiron's presence loomed over them, patient yet unyielding. There would be no third option, no clever solution to sidestep this cosmic dilemma. "Commander," one of the Xindi commandos called out, his voice strained. "We can't maintain the link much longer. We need to decide." Tian met Rakal's gaze one final time. In that moment, volumes passed between them without a word spoken. The fate of civilizations, the very future of the cosmos, balanced on a knife's edge.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. And for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.